So let's crank up the voltage to devastating wounds level, with a look at the newly awakened Necron Immortals with some pretty scary damage combos that they can do, particularly in the Canoptek court. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Necrons once more, and in this video I thought we'd take a look at the Necron Immortals specifically, and take a look how the shock elites of the Necron 2 worlds are shaping up in the 10th edition Codex. I feel like they might be a unit that's of new relevance to quite a lot of people. Most of the detachments can make some really good use of them, and as mentioned, one of them can truly get to apocalyptic levels of damage out of a squad of these. Let's talk about the models, then go through the datasheet, and any obvious buffs and combos that they can do on the board. The Necron Immortals are of course one of two battle line units within the Necron Codex, and they're more the elite battle line of the Necrons, where the warriors are the mindless and soulless phalanx of lesser constructs. When the Necrons conquered the galaxy, they were the fighting elite that did so, and as a result, the Necron commanders reserved their superior constructs for their elite warriors. They're bigger, stronger and tougher, and also retain more semblance of their original personality, flickerings of martial pride and the joy of the kill, and they can be a bit more independent of thought, away from command protocols compared with much of the faction. The kit from Games Workshop gets you 5 Immortals for £27.50, €35 or $45. These ones dating back to the previous big Necron release before Indomitus, although I'd say their models do hold up fairly well. I think they're good enough for what they are, though maybe compared with a few of the more modern plastics, perhaps a slightly simple kit, some basic bigger Necrons with a choice of weapons, either the Tesla carbines or the Gauss. This one's the kit that you can also alternatively build as death marks as well, so you get the points for their sniper weapons and alternate head swaps for them. In game they don't really get you that many points on the board, they're only 1.5 points per dollar, which isn't particularly great as Warhammer 40k goes. Still though, it probably could be worse given that Games Workshop usually releases 5-man squads for significantly more than this these days. It does mean that getting a hold of them is a bit more expensive than before, unless you can find an old copy of the Necron Combat Patrol, which is now out of production. As always, if you were looking to pick some of these up, they are available at various discount retailers around the world. Element Games in the UK, Gap Games in Australia, and Fenris Workshop down in Canada are all linked down in the video description, and they'll get somewhere between 10 and 20% savings off the kit, generally a bit better to buy through Games Workshop in my mind. Getting onto their 10th edition rules in the new Necron Codex though, and the Immortals have a bit more going for them. The datasheet maybe hasn't changed enormously, though the combos and the options that they can use have increased quite a lot. At time of recording we're still waiting for official confirmation of points, though I suspect that it probably won't change too much from where they were before. 70 points for 5 of them, and 140 per 10. Having a max squad size of 10 maybe does limit massive big synergies with them a little bit more than say the warriors that you can field in sizes of 20, or Lichguard, which will be a significantly more points intensive unit with their max size. They're sort of an interesting mid-ground, paying for some boosted stats of their warrior kin. They are quite superior on an individual level. Stats wise, they're toughness 5 with a 3+ save and 1 wound. They're quite a lot more resilient to small arms fire compared with warriors that might often be wounding them on 5s and getting a 3+ save against it, though perhaps not enormously tough for the cost against things like heavy weapons, despite being 1 wound infantry. They move 5 inches and they've got objective control 2, which is handy for getting more OC on points to take them, and they've got a little bit more fight in them than warriors when they get to close combat. 2 attacks at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1, hitting on a 3+, so at least they punish the opponent for just locking them up in combat to tie up their guns a little bit more than the warriors do. Otherwise, they're battle line if you did want to take lots of them for some reason, and they're good options for character attachments as well. With basically all of the standard overlords and cryptex that can join units, they can join these. Their main event, bar their durability and objective control, is certainly their ranged weapons. They get to choose between the powerful Gauss blaster or the Tesla carbine, basically choosing whether or not you want a bit more AP and punching up against tough stuff versus mass volume fire. Both of these guns are now 24-inch range and fire 2 shots at that range. Previously, before the Codex, the Tesla was only range 18, so quite nice that that's got a bit more flexibility. I feel like people are going to be a lot more tempted by the Tesla now. There's definitely positives and negatives to both. I feel like overall in general you're probably better off with Gauss and a small unit that you're not supporting with things, but most of the combos seem to do a little bit better with Tesla than otherwise. In any case, they're hitting on a 3+, which is quite nice for being resilient to modifiers. They'd be hitting on a big 2+ if they had command protocols in Awakened Dynasty. The Gauss gets 2 shots at strength 5, AP 1, damage 1 with lethal hits, so it's going to be better against tough stuff. The Tesla gets strength 5, AP 0 and damage 1, but assault and sustained hits 2. It means that it'll be faster to move around the board, and you don't have to sacrifice on speed, and you'll get a lot more volume fire type hits, so it'll be better against clearing hordes. Before we look at their damage comparison, you do also have to take into account their special rule for that. They always get to reroll wound rolls of 1 against their target, which is handy enough, but like several units in Warhammer 40k, they're just extra good at cleansing enemies off objectives. If they target something that's holding an objective marker, you get to fully reroll the wound roll. Really quite nasty if you fire against enemy troops holding those, and again that's quite big for the Canoptech combo. For damage breakdown, for a squad of 5 of them, if they're not buffed, these are the rough sort of numbers that they spit out at 24 inches. If the enemy isn't on an objective, then these are the numbers that you get against these targets. The Tesla's better against lighter hordes like the Termagants, or anything where the AP doesn't matter all that much. They're around about even with stacking saves on standard intercessors. The Tesla actually pulls ahead a bit more if they're in cover, as it doesn't care about the AP. But then the Gauss does solidly better against Terminators or Rhinos, though I still wouldn't say it's the sort of damage that really punches up enough to actually make the enemy properly scared of it. It's more just a bit of chip damage. The numbers don't really change hugely if you're firing at an objective, still the damage output breakdown is kind of the same, but if you get full reroll wounds it benefits the Tesla a little bit more, given that the Gauss is going to be skipping the wound roll with quite a lot of its attacks, given that it gets lethal hits. Perhaps the biggest catch-up here is against targets like the Rhino that are toughness 9, where the Tesla catches up to almost being the point of the Gauss, despite no AP and no auto wounds at all. Certainly against toughness 10 and higher, though, the Tesla definitely loses out big time. Otherwise, we'll bear in mind that the Tesla will be moving a bit faster when pumping out these numbers, as it does get to advance and shoot. Overall, I feel like Immortals are a fairly interesting unit, generally fairly good damage output against infantry, though they're not really going to be mainline damage dealers without boosts. Not too bad, fairly cheap units to scrap over objectives, and can be a nice cheap one to do things like action type secondary objectives, where the unit needs to sacrifice its firepower or what it's doing. Objective control too definitely means they're helpful to have on midfield points, or even guarding the home field as they've got a bit more range than the Warriors. And as mentioned, they do have good character attachment choice and good options for buffs. For downsides, they're not mainline damage dealers for the most part, given that they're only really good against lighter infantry. Gauss helps them out a little bit against tougher stuff, but doesn't really make them good against those kind of targets, just makes them a bit less worse. Melee is also a bit of a problem for them as well, as if they get locked up they won't be able to shoot without something like a Royal Warden to allow them to fall back. Speaking of which, let's talk characters, and as mentioned the Royal Warden doesn't seem like the worst choice. He was 40 points pre-Codex, and his rules got changed to fall back and still be able to shoot and charge. Definitely not the worst ability if you're investing big in the Immortal squad and you really want their firepower and no chance for the enemy just to ruin it by locking up. Plus he does chip in with his Relic Gauss Blaster as well. Just a little bit more Gauss shooting with damage 2 and 4 shots at 12-inch range. Otherwise, perhaps for more notable character choices, the Overlord with the Translocation Shroud I think is a very good fit for them. The Translocation Shroud means that they automatically advance 6 inches and can do so ghosting through enemy units. That's really nice in the Tesla, as it basically guarantees them an 11-inch move, which means they could just zip straight up to a midfield objective right from turn 1, or potentially get good lines of sight if you're lighting up an opponent for damage. On top of that, they get a free stratagem from My Will Be Done, depends on the detachments, but great in some of them. Has a little bit of melee, and comes with a Resurrection Orb as well, reanimating an extra D6 models once per game, and that is really quite a lot of value returned to the board if they aren't just killed in one fell swoop in a single phase. I feel like if you want to boost an Immortal squad, again he is a very, very tempting choice. Otherwise, the Plasmancer also finds a good home here. He's the one that gets you critical hits on a 5+ when you're shooting, so that means auto wounds on 5s for the Gauss, sustained hits 2 on 5 or more for the Tesla for way more shots, and he combos absolutely great with anything that gives you a full reroll to hit, which out of the detachments 4 out of 5 of them can get you that, and as a result I feel like he could be a tempting choice in literally any of those, so it could be quite interesting there. He also gets 2 strength 7 and damage 2 shots with his Plasmic Lance, plus some mortal wounds as well, so still chipping in with range damage there. Kind of handy, as that should be able to handle a few tougher targets that the rest of the mortals might usually struggle with. Finally, for perhaps some of the most standout characters, Illuminor Zeraz is a bit more of a pricey and high investment choice, but he worsens AP against units within 3 inches of him, and also buffs AP of their augmented weapons by 1. If you're running a bunch of Immortals or Warriors, he could be tempting, though I think you do have to build around him quite a bit, as it's quite a big investment. Tesla all getting AP -1 though makes it just a lot more versatile, and Gauss could really start to punch up against higher saves. Otherwise, Necrons have absolutely tons of units that could potentially be used to suit Immortals. I feel like a lot of them might be a little bit more opportunistic though, just if you happen to have them in the list anyway. The durability cryptex are all options: Chronomancer, Orokin and Technomancer. Immortech could fit well enough for command points and a bit of melee threat. Doesn't seem the worst to have him moving towards the centre of the board with a small unit of Immortals on turn. The Silent King could potentially give you rerolls, though it does overlap with their wound reroll a bit. Monoliths could be another way to pull them out of combat to zip back to them. The Deceiver could redeploy them, the Convergence could give them Feel No Pain, and the Canoptech Reanimator could give you extra D3 reanimation if you're right next to it, though you would have to be close. There are plenty more options, though most of them feel just a bit more niche. I feel like those first 4 characters might be the first ones I'll be thinking about. The durability cryptex are okay as well, I guess. Perhaps the real inspiration for making this video, though, was the Canoptech Court combo that seems to be one of the most talked about damage combos from Codex Necrons, and the idea behind it goes roughly like this, creating a death stack that just deals out a massive amount of devastating wounds. To start with, you equip 10 Immortals with Tesla for maximal shots, then you add that Plasmancer to the units to get critical hits on a 5+, and also importantly give the units the Cryptech keyword. He also brings his own damage along as well, though it will pale in comparison compared with the Tesla. Canoptech Court, provided you're within the power matrix, then allows you full rerolls to hit provided the unit's in that range, so you either need to take the midfield objectives or have them firing from just within your deployment zone. And the plan there is that you just do full rerolls to hit to fish for those 5+, each one getting you sustained hits too, and overall that nets you a massive 38 hits on average with Tesla shots. Then you use that 2 command point stratagem for devastating wound shooting. It's called Cynosure of Eradication. It is pricey, but that basically gives this entire combo devastating wounds of 6s, so all of your AP0 attacks are now just passing straight through enemy armor for each 6 that you roll. You could potentially use an Overlord to get this for free, as it is a battle tactic stratagem and quite a pricey one. Again, that would just go beautifully with that Overlord with the Translocation Shroud. Advance very, very quickly up the board and just blast the enemy with a whole bunch of devastating wounds, plus his other benefits of extra melee, Resurrection Orb, and moving faster. Then, ideally, if you possibly can, you want to target an enemy that's on an objective. That gives you the option of 4 rerolls to wound, so if it makes sense to on a target with a high enough save, you could then just reroll literally everything that isn't a 6 devastating wounds and let the Tesla murdering commence. Overall, those 38 Tesla hits therefore could translate into around about 12 devastating wounds if you're maximally fishing for them, though still around about 6 or so even if you're not rerolling everything. That means that Tesla Immortals would usually just be able to blast dead an enemy battle tank or Dreadnought in a single round of shooting, or kill something like 4 Terminators, never mind any other saves that are just generated by the Tesla in passing, which will definitely be a thing against toughness 5 or less, and the Plasmancer chips in with some mortal wounds and a Plasmic Lance as well. Overall, really quite terrifying, and then you still have a unit that's objective control too and has a fair few, at least tanky bodies, maybe with a Resurrection Orb in it if you've got the Overlord, and you could even potentially do this twice, having one Overlord with a free stratagem, and then another squad just with a Plasmancer, and actually spend the CP for their copy of the stratagem. Overall seems at least fairly terrifying on paper, moving fast, an amazing volume fire against hordes, and still able to pretty equally threaten to kill enemy heavies in a single round of fire. Otherwise though, for the other detachments, the Canoptech Court also has a stratagem to ignore cover on objectives, which could be handy. The low AP might get on well with that, I guess. Besides that, the Awakened Dynasty could give you Immortals hitting on a 2+, a stratagem for re-rolling hits at range with the new version of Conquering Tyrant. Again, that could allow you to trigger Plasmancer critical hits on a 5+, a reactive reanimation stratagem, and the Veil of Darkness or the new version of the Hypermaterial Ablator could also be handy enough relics. The Abatement Phalanx could have an Overlord lead them to get them some Necron Oath of Moment on the go for a +1 to wound, very relevant for Strength 5 sort of mid-strength type weapons that they have, and maybe more so for the Tesla. Means that you could have a Tesla firing against something like a Toughness 8 unit, and they'd be wounding on a 4+, re-rolling the wound roll if it was not on an objective, again leading to loads of stacked saves. Otherwise, it's 1 command point for critical hits on a 5+, and that could be an alternative to having a Plasmancer in the unit. And there is an enhancement that allows you to reroll hit rolls against enemies on objectives, so that would just again lead to some massive rerolls between all their stacked rules. To gun a target off a point, you don't get any devastating wounds here though. Finally, the Hypercrypt redeploys are very nice for just about any shooting unit really, particularly ones with longer range. They could be a reasonable enough target for the one that allows a unit to hyperphase to anywhere 3 inches away of the enemy. They have good OC that could allow them to swoop in and just flat out take a point, and their volume fire could actually be the firepower that you actually need when you get there to clear out a whole bunch of enemy chaff or infantry units. They also have enhancements for a deep strike move, and one that allows them to reroll all hits when they jumped on the board, and again that could be relevant for critical hit 5+s with the Plasmancer as well. Overall, basically between all of those detachments, they can all get you in a place where you can have the critical hits on a 5+ and reroll hit rolls, and then also reroll wound rolls when they're firing at something on an objective. They have different ways of doing it, but they basically get the same sort of big reroll combos going, just minus the devastating wounds that the Canoptech Court can get. If you're trying to build with one of these, then generally I'd say the Tesla is maybe a little bit superior for this. If you're rerolling wound rolls against things on objectives, then the Gauss lethal hits just get a bit less relevant, and even less so if there's more of them by getting more of them from the critical hit 5+ combo. It means that against the majority of things that are toughness 9 or less, the Tesla Immortals tend to do a little bit better, or at least kind of similar, though realistically there's not really all that much in it. I'd probably just be a little bit more tempted by the Tesla overall, though it does mean that you don't have to feel too bad if you've got them modelled with Gauss already. If you were building very big for the Immortals, then a bit of extra AP from Seraz could absolutely make these numbers a lot better as well, particularly against the highly armoured targets like Terminators. Even the Tesla would average something like around about 10 wounds or so if you're firing against that kind of target with him around. Overall, I'd say that in the new Codex, Immortals were initially looking a lot more solid in comparison with Warriors. I feel like I would have been a bit more tempted by Warriors in the old rules, but losing their boosted reanimation really hurt a lot, and Gauss Reapers going to Strength 4 didn't help either. I guess at time of recording we still have points to see, so if Immortals stayed the same when Warriors went way down, that might change things a bit. I have a feeling that given these combos though, people are going to be interested in Immortals in the new book. They do seem just flat out awesome, even if they were to cost a lot in the Canoptech Court though. Hard to get around just 12 damage 1 devastating wounds. You could certainly have multiple blocks of these in that detachment, and I feel like their damage output could be truly savage, and maybe incentivize your opponent not to put units on objectives as well, which is probably just a good thing for winning the game for the Tomb Worlds in the first place. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the Immortals down in the comments below. Would you be tempted to put a few more of them in your army list after the updates, or are you currently more tempted by other things? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I'll try and have a few more videos coming for the Necrons over the next week or so. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.